Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today we are unpacking something deeply complex, a 300-year forensic investigation into Sikh political survival. We're diving into a monumental document titled The Instrument Within, which meticulously breaks down the anatomy of internal betrayal across centuries of post-Guru Sikh history. It's an intense, incredibly detailed look at how communities survive, how they get compromised from the inside out, and how history actually records the difference. To really grasp this, we have to start where the source starts, with a pretty haunting opening motif, before the Gurbani hymn, the Cremation Ground. It's a stark reminder that we have to acknowledge the visceral, physical toll before we can get into any of the historical or political theories. And just as a heads up, this explainer maintains a totally dispassionate, clinical neutrality, simply because the source material demands it. We're not looking at a chaotic list of grievances today, we're looking at a rigorous, structured accounting of history. To ground this abstract history in reality, let's put a specific number to that physical toll. 2,097. That is the documented number of secretly cremated bodies in the Amritsar district during the modern counterinsurgency period. That number cements the ultimate physical cost of institutional failure. It reminds us exactly why distinguishing between genuine traitors, political accommodators, and institutional silence matters so deeply.
Okay, let's dive right in. Here's our roadmap for the explainer. We'll be covering the trusted insider, grading the evidence, the genuine traitors, institutional failures and accommodators, the counterinsurgency record, and finally, reckoning and redemption.
Starting off with Section 1, the trusted insider, a recurring mechanism. So, what does this all mean? Well, the author zeroes in on one devastating pattern that just keeps repeating itself across 3 centuries of history, the trusted insider. The source defines this as the hinge through which external power entered, struck the Panth or the Sikh community from within, and then asked history to forget. Our focus here is strictly on those who had a bond of trust and broke it. We are not talking about external enemies who always wanted to harm the community. We're talking about the massive internal vulnerability that's created when a custodian, a general, or a leader completely breaks their oath. Which brings us to Section 2, grading the evidence, using 4 strict tiers. Now, what's really interesting here is how the source actually evaluates these historical claims without just relying on pure emotion. It uses 4 incredibly strict evidentiary tiers. First up, we have proved findings. These are your adjudicated facts in judicial outcomes. Second, documented allegations, serious, credible claims that haven't quite seen a formal legal conviction. Third, analytical inference, reasoned conclusions drawn from institutional patterns or glaring silences. And finally, panthic memory, which is the living moral record held by the community itself. Every single figure we look at is measured against this exact rubric to keep the analysis completely objective. All right, Section 3, the genuine traitors, focusing on the 18th and 19th centuries. With our framework totally locked in, we can start applying this grading system to specific historical examples. And this brilliantly illustrates the crucial difference between an external invader and a true insider threat. Take Ahmad Shah Abdali, an external invader responsible for mass atrocities. He is an enemy for sure, but he's not a traitor. Versus someone like Gulab Singh Dogra, a genuine traitor. He was an insider who deliberately withheld his troops during the First Anglo-Sikh War, intentionally letting the Khalsa army fall. And as a direct reward for his treachery, he literally purchased the Kingdom of Kashmir from the British. Building on that, just look at the rapid collapse of the Khalsa Raj. After Maharaja Ranjit Singh died in 1839, the state didn't just crumble to superior British military might. It was actively dismantled by internal sabotage. You had Vizier Lal Singh withholding reserves at absolutely crucial moments, and Commander Tez Singh destroying the bridge at Sobrayan, trapping his own army. The empire fell in 1849 primarily because of these bought and paid-for generals. Fast forward into the colonial era, and the nature of betrayal kind of shifts gears. It moves away from military generals and over to corrupted custodians of sacred spaces. A prime example from the source is Mahant Narayan Das. He was trusted to look after the birthplace of Guru Nanak. But in 1921, he orchestrated a brutal massacre of peaceful reformers who had simply come to reclaim the shrine, even burning their bodies right there on the premises. It's a definitive proved finding of a custodian weaponizing his trust against his own community. Moving right along to Section 4, institutional failures and accommodators. This is where the explainer shifts focus from pure malice into some really complex pragmatism. The document is careful to distinguish between two highly nuanced categories. First, you have institutional failure. Think of President Jani Zayal Singh during 1984. He held the highest constitutional office in the land, but he failed to use his symbolic authority to act during the military assault on the Darbar Sahib. Passive complicity. On the flip side, you have political accommodators, like Baldev Singh in 1947. The source argues that Baldev Singh wasn't a traitor. Rather, he was a realist forced into making highly constrained, pragmatic choices when securing a separate Sikh state was practically impossible.
But this kind of accommodation can curdle into something a lot more insidious: structural betrayal through institutional capture. The source points out long-tenured leaders like Gurcharan Singh Tora, who essentially captured religious governance purely for political gain. It also breaks down the BADAL dynasty's managed political survival, where any real accountability for 1984-era crimes was systematically kicked down the road. And this pattern extends all the way to the 2015 BB, or sacrilege crisis, where political interests deeply compromised independent investigations. The institution itself literally becomes the instrument of betrayal.
Next up, Section 5, the counterinsurgency record. Without a doubt, the darkest chapter. Now, as we look at the counterinsurgency record of the 1980s and 90s, please keep that clinical evidentiary framework in mind. Take Police Chief KBS SIDHU, for instance. His legacy is incredibly tense. The source record's a massive contradiction here. On one hand, he's credited by the state with restoring order. But on the other, we have a proved finding of a vast system of mass extrajudicial killings and secret cremations operating under his command. The source notes that while the atrocity system itself is a proved finding, Gill's personal legal command responsibility remains a documented allegation and an analytical inference. It's a pretty chilling look at the actual limits of legal accountability. However, for others, the courts have been crystal clear. For these specific officers involved in the abduction and murder of human rights defender Jaswant Singh Khalra, the judicial system has handed down definitive proved findings. They were tried, convicted, and sentenced to life in prison. The source names them strictly based on that adjudicated record. Of course, the police didn't just operate in a vacuum. The source uses analytical inference to highlight a massive institutional silence that it calls the civilian shield failure. Basically, 3 successive deputy commissioners in Amritsar completely ignored their statutory mandate to investigate these secret cremations. By failing to open inquiries into all these unidentified bodies, the civilian magistracy effectively gave the cremation system a green light to continue totally unchecked. Finally, Section 6, Reckoning and Redemption, looking through the theological framework. After unpacking all of this heavy history, we really need to understand how Sikh theology actually processes these deep generational wounds. The source breaks down 2 crucial concepts. First, there's homai, or ego. This is seen as the theological root of all betrayal, putting your own personal survival or gain right above the community. But here's the thing. The tradition doesn't rely on eternal condemnation. Instead, it uses tanka, which is an institutional mechanism for proportionate public punishment. It requires the transgressor to openly acknowledge the breach, submit to discipline, and ultimately it offers a real path to eventual restoration and healing. So, the crucial point is this. We have to be absolutely precise. To accurately label any historical figure a true traitor, the source lays out 4 strict requirements that all must be met. 1. A bond of trust must exist. 2. There must be a conscious breach of that trust. 3. Personal benefit has to be gained at the community's expense. And 4. There must be a direct causal connection to the harm caused. If even a single one of those is missing, we might just be looking at institutional failure or political accommodation, but not genuine calculated treachery. And that brings us to a really powerful theological note. The story of the Chale Muktait, or the 40 liberated ones. These were 40 warriors who actually abandoned the Guru during a brutal siege, even going so far as to sign a document of renunciation. But they came back, they fought, and they sacrificed absolutely everything to make it right. Their story is living proof that a genuine, costly return leaves the door to the Panth wide open. Betrayal doesn't have to mean permanent exclusion, as long as the reckoning is real. Which leaves us with a pretty provocative final thought. The source brings all this abstract theology crashing right back into the visceral reality we started with today. For the figures still living who engineered or ignored those atrocities, the historical archive is very much still open. But the real question is, will the door to redemption remain open for those who have yet to reckon with the families of the 2,097 secretly cremated dead? It is a profound, truly unforgettable challenge left by history. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.